Welcome everyone to Fish Four Ways, aka Fish Any Day. Thank you for joining us. So as many of you know, March is National Nutrition Month, and the theme is personalize your plate. Seafood is very personal to a lot of people around the world, including many coastal cities in the United States, where seafood is highly prized and has deep roots within the city's history. Before the canning industry took place, people would salt their fish to preserve it in the off months when fresh seafood could not be caught. And today we can eat seafood year round, thanks to the many preservation methods that we have. So the 2020 Dietary Guidelines state that we should aim for 2 servings of seafood per week, but they also report that almost 90% of Americans don't get enough seafood. So why is that? Well, fresh seafood can be expensive for starters, and not everyone lives close by to a major grocery store or a fish market. So today we'll explore the benefits of frozen and canned seafood and demonstrate the many ways that you can eat seafood year round. We will also touch on food waste in the seafood industry, which is very fitting for Phil Abundance since we have an entire department dedicated to making sure that edible food gets into the hands of people. So first, let's talk about some nutrition. Why is it important to include seafood in your diet? Seafood is a low-fat, high-quality protein. Protein is an essential macronutrient that our bodies need to function. So seafood is naturally low in saturated fat, but many types of fish are high in the heart-healthy fats that most Americans don't get enough of, called omega-3 fatty acids. Seafood's also a great source of iron, zinc, phosphorus, calcium, and more. As with all food groups, we want to try to eat a variety. The recommendation for seafood is to eat a variety that's high in omega-3s and low in mercury. And this is especially true for young children, as well as women who could be or are pregnant or lactating. Some seafood that's high in omega-3s and low in mercury includes salmon, anchovies, and sardines, or what we call fatty fish. Again, they're not really high in fat, but they're fattier than other fish. Scallops, tilapia, shrimp, crab, these are low in mercury and can be a part of a healthy diet, but they're less high in those omega-3s that we want to get enough of. As I mentioned earlier, we want to eat seafood about 2 to 3 times a week. So that could mean a can of tuna. It could mean a piece of fresh or frozen salmon about the size of a deck of cards. That would be a serving size. While there's no comparison to fresh seafood, this is not available to most people, especially in the winter months. If you've watched our previous cooking workshops that we've done, we talk about how fresh or frozen and canned fruits and vegetables are just as nutritious as fresh, if not more. But like produce, many people think that fresh seafood is superior to canned and frozen. But the question we're talking about today is fresh seafood the freshest option? Frozen seafood is actually frozen within hours of being caught, sometimes minutes within being caught, and that's to preserve the flavor, nutrients, and maintain food safety. On the other hand, most of the fresh seafood that we see in stores has previously been frozen and then thawed again for display. And then much of this seafood that's on display, if it's not purchased, has to be thrown out at the end of the day, which contributes to the millions of pounds of seafood wasted every year, as well as the high prices we pay at seafood counters. So this is one reason why buying frozen seafood can prevent food waste. There are many ways to enjoy different kinds of seafood throughout the week without having to go to the store to buy special ingredients. You can keep your pantry stocked with seafood so that you can whip up a really easy weeknight meal that's both nutritious and delicious. So I'm really excited that joining us today, we have Dr. Jonathan Deutsch. He is a chef, Drexel professor, and founding director of the Drexel Food Lab, which is a food product development and culinary innovation lab that seeks to solve real-world problems. He's done a lot of research in this area to educate the public about the many ways to enjoy seafood in a budget-friendly and environmentally friendly way. So welcome, John.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we're gonna start out with this really simple cook from frozen salmon recipe, mustard roasted salmon. So I'm going to tilt my screen so you can all see what I'm doing. This beautiful filet that I'm going to be using is from Aqua Bounty. They donated 50,000 pounds of salmon to Philabundance, which provided this high quality protein to thousands of people in our region. So the recipe link is in the chat, and my oven is preheated. So while I do the ingredients for our salmon, very simple ingredients, John, can you talk about this cook from frozen concept and how it got started?
Yep, absolutely. It's great to see so many familiar names in the participant list. Thanks so much for having me. And can I also mention, Alex, that I was your professor in your master's in culinary arts and science at Drexel. So there's nothing more gratifying than seeing your success. So yeah, Alex, this came about because Alex knew that we did some work with the World Wildlife Fund around Cook from Frozen, and asked for recipes. And then as we got to talking, she invited me to join, which I'm thrilled to do. As Alex mentioned, seafood is one of the most wasteful departments in the store. And unlike other departments like meat, for example, where a retailer could freeze the meat, on its sell by or the day before its sell by and freeze it and get it to Philabundance. In seafood, it's really not fit for conversion. And also, as Alex mentioned, it's really shocking that the majority of seafood at the seafood counter, even in coastal areas, is defrosted from frozen. So, and I have a picture. I won't mention the store, but it's a picture of a 2-pound bag of frozen tilapia for $6.99, and at the seafood counter, fresh tilapia from frozen, $5.99 a pound. And it's the exact same brand. They just take it out the night before, let it defrost, and put it on ice because there's a consumer perception that that's somehow fresher. So our work in this area came from Pete Pearson, who's the food waste director at the World Wildlife Fund. And he said, well, I don't understand why people are essentially paying the supermarket to defrost their fish for them. When I buy burgers, I buy the frozen patties and I just throw a veggie burger or a beef burger on the grill and it cooks. Why can't you do that with fish? And I answered with sort of my food science hat on and said, well, it's about density and surface area, and you couldn't do it with a big fillet like salmon or something like that. And then I kind of realized that I'm not practicing what I preach. When we teach culinary, we always say, try it, explore, take risks, create. And so our students actually tried what Alex is demoing right now and found out that actually you could cook from frozen really well and really efficiently. And it also solves a lot of consumer problems. So when we talk to consumers, there it is. And you just put it in the oven right from there. So that recipe couldn't be easier. It's mustard and lemon juice, sometimes some maple syrup or some brown sugar if you want more of a glazed. And it's the kind of thing that by the time you get home from work, cook some rice, you could throw veggies in with the fish, check your mail, change out of your work clothes. It's done. And she has other recipes too that she could share.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so I just put the salmon in the oven, and that took less than 5 minutes. So that was really easy. My salmon was a little more defrosted, so it'll probably take less than 40 minutes. But like John said, you can just pop it right in the oven. It'll take less time if it's thawed out more. So the next recipe I'm doing is the salmon meatballs. And the goal with all of these is we have some overlapping ingredients, but they're all very common ingredients that you could easily have in your kitchen already. So mustard, right? Most people have some kind of mustard. You can use whole grain or not. And as you'll see, we're using a lot of lemons today. We're using some simple herbs. Fresh herbs are great, but you don't have to. So yeah, I wanted to ask too, John, what do you generally talk to people about when it comes to farmed versus wild caught? Is that something that you've looked into?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And like so many other things in food, people are looking for a a yes or no answer,
Right.
which is good, which is bad. And like so many other things in food, like meat, and so many issues, meat, vegetables, um, there's no easy answer. There are really wonderful um, wild caught seafood producers who obey the quotas and the fishery lanes and pay fair wages and have good safety protocols for their workers. Um, and there are wild caught fisheries who fish in prohibited areas and overfish and have dangerous working conditions. There are farms that are highly sustainable, have great practices, have plenty of space for the fish so that they don't need antibiotics, which is often used prophylactically to prevent against infection in overcrowded fish farms. And there are bad actors who are polluting their areas and treating their employees poorly and treating the fish poorly. So it's really about finding reputable suppliers with transparent policies, doing a little bit of research if you can, from places like Monterey Bay Aquarium, or World Wildlife Fund, or the James Beard Smart Catch program, or shopping from somewhere with those practices accounted for. So many retailers have seafood sustainability programs, and you could actually ask them, which is a more sustainable option, or they will only stock fish that meets a certain threshold. In terms of nutrition, there's really no difference. The omega-3s are the same. Genetically, they're the same in many cases, but you'll get a little bit different flavor sometimes. For example, a wild caught salmon is typically a little heartier and meatier and a little bit richer in flavor, which some people find too fishy. Other people really crave that. So it just depends on the production.
Yeah. And feel free to type it in the chat if you use frozen seafood at home. How do you use it? So do you have any go-to ways that you use frozen seafood? Feel free to share with us. I'm curious what other people do. Great. So just to let you know what I'm doing here, I'm doing these salmon meatballs, which I think are something I hadn't really heard of before. I've made a lot of salmon cakes in my life, but salmon meatballs was different. And simple, canned Alaskan pink salmon that I removed the bones earlier. And then we just did some lemon zest. I have a zester, but you can also use a grater, and just don't get too far into the peel. You want to just get the that first layer of the peel. And I didn't have za'atar, the spice blend, so I'm using thyme and oregano as a replacement. So za'atar I just didn't find it at my store. But yeah, you just mix it together and then form meatballs. I'm gonna have the breadcrumbs now. I already cracked the eggs, and those are gonna go in at 375 also. So while our frozen salmon cooks, we can also cook the meatballs. So I think, John, you already talked about this, but for a marinade for frozen fish, what's kind of the formula? Because I often do like a soy maple marinade. But
Yeah, those flavors are great. I think with marinades, one of the keys is not to be restricted by a recipe. It's really, when we teach this, we really talk about platforms. It's not something you have to look up Enjoy of Cooking and measure every ingredient perfectly. It's really about incorporating flavor. So usually you have some sort of acid is key. Usually, especially for lean things like fish, some sort of oil or fat, and then something aromatic. So things like herbs, citrus, spices, anything like that. And you can sort of do those improvisationally. It's not like you need an exact ratio, but if you need one, generally speaking, it's about 3-to-1 oil to acid, and then salt, always salt and pepper, or salt or pepper, and as many aromatics as you want. Garlic is, I think, key.
Yes, I agree. I just want to see, are there any questions in the chat that we are missing? Anything that we should be talking about? I'm going to mix up our
So someone asked about methods of cooking frozen seafood. So
yes.
yeah, the main thing is you can cook it from frozen. And Shan, hi Shan, had a great example. It can go right into a pan. It could go onto a grill. It could go in a foil or parchment paper, which in classic cooking is called in papillote, but you could also just call it a pouch. It could go in the oven in a baking pan or a roasting sheet pan, as Alex showed you with the salmon. So it's pretty versatile. You can't get sort of precision cooking, but most people don't look for that anyway. They want kind of thoroughly cooked, but not overcooked. One of the things we found in working with consumers around cook from frozen is it solved a lot of problems. Frozen seafood tends to be one of those aspirational things. So a lot of families shop on the weekend for the week, and maybe they buy, you know, a couple different things at the seafood counter, and they have every intention of cooking them. And then, you know, they go to happy hour after work, or they get home later than expected and stop at Wawa on the way home. And then you have, you know, fish in your fridge, and you have further waste. Not only is it the most wasteful by dollar department in the retailer, but then you also have more household waste. So the cook from frozen helps with that. We also hear that people don't like handling fresh seafood. So people are squeamish about touching it. Obviously, as we watch Alex work, she is not in that category. But some people are, and so it makes it a little bit easier for them. And the other thing we hear is, despite all of our work in food safety collectively and nutrition and food education, we sampled a few hundred shoppers and asked how they defrost frozen seafood. And in the front running, you know, so the official proper way to do it is either ideally in the fridge overnight or over a few hours, or if that's not possible, under cold running water. Microwave is acceptable, but not really advisable. And still many consumers, about a third, defrost on the countertop, which is the worst way to do it from a food safety perspective. So it solves that problem.
We do have another question from Sammy. It says, I've been buying those pre-made cook from frozen kits in the freezer, and I'm wondering whether I could just take any fillet and do the same thing myself to get more variety of fish and flavorings. I assume dense fillets like salmon and tuna are best to work with. What about flounder, cod, and other types of fish?
Yeah, you can substitute other fish. The main thing is that the hardier, denser fish just need a longer cooking time. So something like flounder, or things like scallops, that, you know, when I was in culinary school, the instructor said, when scallops are hot, they're done, you know, because they're really easy to overcook. Whereas something like salmon might take longer to thoroughly cook. So, and then the other thing to keep in mind is sort of manipulating it. So if you're cooking something really delicate like flounder, it's easy to just flake apart and it sort of disappears into something like a sauce or a stir fry. So you just need to make sure you're not moving it around too much as you cook. Something like tuna or salmon, or, you know, swordfish, something a little bit denser and hardier, you can chop up into cubes. You can saute it and toss it around the pan. You can flip it on the grill. It's going to be a lot more durable for that kind of cooking.
That's a great question.
Another question, are there similar concerns with undercooked fish as there are with chicken or other types of meat?
There are different concerns. So yeah, there are some parasites in fish that are killed by cooking. You should not try your own sushi or crudo. There's a process that sushi restaurants use, and anyone serving raw fish, it's called certified, where it has to be frozen for a few weeks at a very low temperature to kill any worms, which can, move from, if they're not killed, they would move from the fish to you if they're not cooked. And you can actually see them when you buy fish, especially things like cod. You can see the little worms in there. When you cook them thoroughly, you don't even notice, and we've all eaten them, whether we want to admit it or not. So you should follow, usually on the package, there's a recommended cooking temperature. I think it's 145, but I see Steve and Rich and some other chefs on here, or maybe Alex, maybe you know the exact official serve safe temp.
Oh boy. Drop in the chat if you know.
Yeah, I'll look it up while you're talking.
Just so everyone knows, I moved on to the mackerel salad sandwich. So I'm using sardines because, again, that's what I had. And John said it was okay. So you can buy sardines as well. I think mackerel can be slightly more expensive, but they're, again, both small fatty fish that are high in omega-3s. And I actually got this at a dollar store. A lot of these canned items I got at my local dollar store. So I've actually had some of these for a while. I didn't really know what to do with them until recently. So I'm going to add these sardines, which are packed in oil. And then that actually helps to preserve more of the omega-3s, because if you keep the oil rather, then you're not losing any of the omega-3s. So you want to, I'm going to keep the oil when I do this recipe. So I'm getting all those omega-3s, because otherwise you might lose some if you drain it. Let's see. So the meatballs are in the oven, and John, can you talk about this mackerel salad sandwich? It's from the Anti-Inflammatory cookbook, and I want to make sure we hear a little bit about that work that you did. Can you tell us about the background of this cookbook, the Anti-Inflammatory cookbook?
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Steve. So it is 145 for
Yay.
fish. That was buried back there. So this is from a book we worked on with CHOP called the Anti-Inflammatory Family Cookbook. And I don't want to spend too much time on inflammation, but basically we wrote this book because there's a lot of language that's thrown around, things like anti-inflammatory, Mediterranean diet, plant forward, and they all kind of mean the same thing. We really object to the term Mediterranean diet because so many cultures traditionally eat in this very veg forward way, which has these anti-inflammatory properties. So we don't want to connote that you have to be sitting on the Mediterranean to have this kind of experience. It's really from all over the world, but key is inflammation is a natural healthy process. The easiest way to describe it is when you have an injury, like a cut or a scrape, it gets red and hot, and that's inflammation, and that's your body's way of healing itself. But when you are inflamed sort of systemically, chronically, your body kind of doesn't know what to do with it, because it's not a little cut that it can focus on, it's sort of everything. And so that is not healthy and is associated with higher risk of non-communicable diseases and all sorts of other negative health outcomes. So the idea of this book is really to teach ways to sort of easily incorporate anti-inflammatory foods and practices. And it's not all about cooking, even things like stress can be inflammatory, ultra processed foods. And so one of the keys to anti-inflammatory diet is reducing, not necessarily eliminating, although you could eliminate red meat consumption, and increasing seafood consumption. And key to that is omega-3s and really the increasing omega-3s and reducing omega-6s, which tend to come from things like corn oil, canola oil, a lot of ultra processed foods.
Yep.
Fish that are fatty, like mackerel, sardines, tend to be very high in omega-3s. And those smaller fish, things like sardines and anchovies, are also tend to be more sustainable because they are not very old and tend to kind of proliferate, and also have relatively low levels of heavy metals and mercury. Those tend to come from older predatory fish, things like shark and swordfish, and some tuna. So this recipe that Alex is doing is a great example of, I grew up thinking sardines were gross because I grew up on Sesame Street and Oscar the Grouch used to make fun of sardines, but they're delicious, and it can be a little bit more sustainable, a little bit more higher omega-3 alternative to tuna salad, to use other kinds of tinned seafood, which I saw someone asked earlier, are very much in vogue right now as sort of a culinary product, but also a great, delicious, easy solution.
Thank you. So just so everyone knows, my house smells very fishy at this point. We have our mackerel salad, which can just be like tuna salad. And so mine's a little more runny because I kept the oil, but you can drain it, like I said. And then this is the Mediterranean tuna salad, which I made earlier. So there's so many variations of tuna salad. I'm gonna tilt my screen back up. But this one has frozen peas, carrots, cucumber. So that's just one way to kind of use tuna salad as a way to just fill it with vegetables. Sometimes I add curry powder to tuna. I used to hate tuna. Now it's kind of a go-to, just lazy meal. But like John was saying, it's nice to mix it up with the canned seafood. Tuna is a great nutritious fish, but it's not one of the higher omega-3 sources that we can find. So that's why I'm excited about the sardine and mackerel exposure for this. So I'm waiting for the other two items to get finished. Any questions that we can answer while we're...
I just want to make a quick comment that saving the oil is a great thing to do to capture those omega-3s. And even if you want to drain, even if you don't want your tuna salad to have that oil, you could save it in a little jar. It's delicious. Just if you like fish, it's delicious as a sauce for like a fillet of fish or something else that you cook, as an ingredient in a marinade, including the marinade you saw earlier for the salmon, or just like tossed with pasta, or used to cook vegetables. It can be used in so many ways. And then you're saving money not using something like olive oil when you have perfectly delicious olive oil that so many people, the oil in the fish, so many people just instinctually throw it away. And that's flavor and nutrition that they're washing down the drain. I see Mary's question. Fish and oil is not necessarily better than fish and water, just different. I think I like oil because the thing I really value about canned seafood is the flavor and the omega-3s, and the water tends to, unless you're making a sauce or something like that, the water tends to go down the drain, where the oil is useful for other things, and you can capture some of those omega-3s. But it's really personal preference. Let's see, are there other questions? I'm scrolling, but feel free to jump in.
So just to show you, this is the finished salmon. Looks really beautiful. Again, this is an Aqua Bounty filet. And this is definitely, you definitely taste the mustard. So if you're not a fan of mustard, you might want to do something else. But again, this was so easy. And it took 20 minutes. It'll take longer if you're cooking from frozen. But these are the salmon meatballs, which I made a cucumber yogurt sauce ahead of time for the flavors to meld. And so you can make it into a salad. You could just eat it like this. And I really like the look of it because it has little herbs. So I think they look really pretty. And so I'll just display this out here. So that was it. And that took less than 30 minutes to make 4 different recipes. So this is kind of a seafood overload. However, it just goes to show that it doesn't have to be a time intensive thing. So
Michelle asked a question that's really relevant to you right now, Alex, because I see you're doing this at home. So how long can prepared seafood stay in the fridge?
Oh goodness. That I mean, I've heard maybe 3 days is the maximum, but
yeah,
I don't.
That sounds about right. Yeah, 2 or 3 days. I wouldn't keep it longer than that. And
Yeah.
make sure you chill it properly. Don't leave it out for hours and then put it in the fridge, right? So either eat it after you cook it or chill it quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't want to mess around too much with that. So maybe 2 to 3 days. And I also want to say we chose these recipes because of the convenience, the cost. They're, less common ways to maybe eat fish. So, feel free to drop any of your favorite recipes into the chat, ways that you prepare fish, your variations of tuna salad. We'd love to hear it. But yeah, one of my favorite things to do is to, make things more approachable in terms of nutrition. So things like omega-3 fatty acids, people, sometimes it just feels like there's a price tag that some people, it's just not very accessible. But these are all very accessible items to find at the dollar store, at your grocery store. So we really wanted to show that seafood can be more accessible. And hopefully we'll have a higher percentage of Americans getting those omega-3s and getting their seafood servings every week. So I know we have some questions that we have not gotten to. The first one that I know I want to talk about is, which we've already discussed, but if you don't eat animal products, where can you get omega-3s? So I want to address that. And I'll just answer that and then we can go on to other questions. So ground flaxseed, walnuts, vegetable oils like flaxseed oil, walnut, canola, and soybean oil, those have omega-3s. So you can get omega-3s from other sources. And then of course you should talk to your doctor about the best ways to make sure you get enough omega-3s. But you do not have to eat animals to get them. As with anything else, animal sources can sometimes have the highest amount of certain nutrients. So they can be the best sources, but you don't have to be a meat eater or a seafood eater. So Olivia, I'll have you ask questions that you're seeing.
Yes. We do have a question here. Where can I find fresh fish in Philadelphia?
Yes. So we have a organization called Fishadelphia CSF. We love food puns here at Philabundance. So I wanted to shout out Fishadelphia. They're a community seafood program, and it's run by youth in Philadelphia schools. We actually have an access code for you all. If you go to the link, I think it's going to be posted in the chat. You can get $2 off their spring subscription. But basically, it's a great way to support local fishermen in the Philly region, as well as New Jersey. And you're also supporting a youth-run program that helps teach students business skills. So that's a really great one. So Fishadelphia CSF would be my recommendation to check out. Great question. Any other questions?
Yes, we do have another question. Do you have any advice about Mercury Concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. So you want to go for the fish that are highest in omega-3s and lowest in mercury. So those are things like the sardines, mackerel, anchovies, canned salmon. So those are all going to be lower in mercury. Again, smaller fish. I think John said because they're not carnivorous, so you're going to get lower mercury in those. But yeah, that's really important to watch out for. So tuna is also generally low in mercury. Great question. Awesome. I'm reading a question here. Any other questions? I just saw one. So Kat is saying, oh yeah, thank you, Kat. So Kat is saying she gets her omegas from other sources. Shredded hearts of palm, sprinkled with dried seaweed, and a spritz of lime, warmed a bit. Oh wow, I've never heard of that. That's awesome.
Yeah, another kind of go-to is a mock tuna salad from chickpeas. It's really delicious and easy, and it's one of my, like, I have nothing in the house, but I generally have a can of chickpeas somewhere kind of meals.
Yep, and there's actually a chickpea tuna salad recipe on the Healthy Pantry Initiative website. So for those of you who haven't done the recipe challenge yet, you could try that chickpea salad recipe. And that's on the Healthy Pantry Initiative recipe tab. Wonderful. So I think we're wrapping up. I really want to thank Dr. Jonathan Deutsch for joining us. This is really fun for me. Like he said, I was a student in multiple classes actually. And so this is really fun to have him share his expertise. And thank you all for joining. We hope to do more of these in the future. But yeah, let me know what you think of the recipes if you try them.